It's as well to avoid dismissiveness in one's reaction. Someone says something. If you reply, "Oh, of course, so-and-so," it's to say that what you think is important to point out is taken for granted. There's no point in saying that. That's not the point that I'm arguing. It's a way of belittling the other person. Well, that's relating to people in the negative, isn't it? A bit like saying we shouldn't be angry with people, or we shouldn't ignore people. If I now try to put it in the positive, we should take account of people around us. Be conscious of what they're saying and what they're proposing, what they're doing. If we're not conscious of them, of course, then we're not taking them into account in our actions, and our actions may therefore be troublesome to them. So an important part of caring for others is going to be a consciousness of them. I wonder what you're thinking. I could ask you. And of course, if I do ask you, I must listen, mustn't I? I must be conscious of what you're saying, aware, engaged in that sense. Whereas we tend to think the person is engaged who is actually speaking. No, he's delivering with purpose. If he's speaking, he's wanting to influence in some way, to show you what his view is, tell you something you don't know that perhaps may be of benefit to you, or a warning or something, you know. He has a purpose. In fact, of course, everything we do is with purpose, isn't it? Unless we just feel we need the limbs to move, so we exercise. But even, I suppose, that is a purpose. We sort of feel, oh, I'm a bit stiff today, I stretch and move the body and get it back into shape. So, a loving care of others is, of course, not to dismiss them, and, of course, to listen to them, and not dismiss what they say, or not listen to them, which is to dismiss their view as not important to you. We can't be caring for them if this is the case, can we? I mean, there's a limit how much caring we can do about us. I mean, we're a crowd of people. We can't be conscious of everyone's views and so forth. And I suppose the typical, especially Eastern spiritual view, but Christian as well, was that avoid the maddening crowds, the bustle and the noise and the distraction. Find a place of peace, and in some sense, the flat surface of the lake, a wide open expanse, a distant view, has a certain settlement and peace about it. You know, the view is not changing radically. If we look very closely, we see the trees are actually moving in the wind over there, but from a distance, the view is largely set. The movement is trivial compared to the basic appearance of things and location of things and so on. Of course, if we're furiously talking, then we're not focused on listening. If we're arguing a point, we may be very focused on the point we're arguing, less focused on whether you're following my line of reason or not. I'm giving words that I think are enough to trace my line of thinking. But I'm not checking necessarily that you're with me on this. You're receiving what I think I'm sending. And of course, conversations get out of hand. I was making a point with a friend that there was a difference between uncertainty and probability. In particular, I was trying to labour that probability is an assessment of the likelihood of something according to a particular amount of information that you have. And so it's not singular. The probability of an event happening from your point of view is different to my expectations of the probability. So if we're analysing probability, we have to say, well, whose? And in this mix of things, I was also trying to stress that our expectation about the future may be limited by a great deal of uncertainty, very little experience of such situations that are similar before. You may have more experience than me, for instance, and might, in consequence, be more likely to come up with the right answer of expectation, confirmed by whatever the outcome turns out to be. Now, I think we are making decisions amidst all sorts of uncertainties. And we don't have some probability distribution of likely outcome in mind. We could assume a model where we do have such probability distributions and then work out what would be rational. But I think we know in the back of our mind that everything is causally interrelated, one way and another. And it's extremely complex, the causality that's going on. In other words, our models are always incredibly simplifying the reality that may be out there. So we can analyse and find the implications of simple models rationally, but they're not necessarily, by any means, reliable when it comes to application to the real world. So I might be able to predict quite carefully how much lift I need for a certain aircraft and what wingspan and what angles and what thrust and so on. But of course, if he's flying through a flight of geese, well, that's going to mess things up. And it's an unknown. How often do we see geese somewhere near the aircraft, and in what circumstances? And, life gets very complicated very, very quickly just with one particular possible hazard. Now, hopefully coming into flights of geese is rare, so it's not such an important hazard that we can't risk flying aeroplanes. But then there are many other hazards too, aren't there? I mean, you run into unusual windstorms, unusual atmospheric conditions, and so on and so forth. I mean, quite apart from deliberate sabotage by people shooting at you from the ground or, putting bombs in the aeroplane and so on. So, in other words, there are a host of conceivable problems that can arise. And we go for situations where such in general don't seem to be a major problem. They're very rare. And then we might find strategies for coping with rare problems, but they're so rare that there's a limit to how much resources we're going to put to such solutions. What I tend to be saying is that apart from where our technology really is found to be useful, there are many, many situations where we're living in a situation of much uncertainty and we wing it. Some people are more trusting to wing it than others. Some are very timid. They won't jump off cliffs with a heap of feathers because the birds can fly. Perhaps I can as well. They're much more cautious. And one or two aren't, and they, perhaps almost 100% of them, fall to their death, So we've become very clear that just having feathers is not going to be a reliable way to go. And in fact, peculiarly, we found flying to be quite different. I mean, we have aeroplanes where they don't flap the wings. They do have wings, but things seem to be a bit different. And of course, the obvious, they're not powered by muscle power. That didn't seem to be the way to go after all. And we now manage to fly in a quite different way to the way the birds do. Or the bee or the mosquito or whatever. And in general, 99.9% of the time, it works. There's all sorts of things that may come into issue, and especially a combination of such problems coinciding can result in a particular flight not working. But then, of course, with experience, we say, well, this works generally, so I think I'll risk flying to New Zealand to migrate, I could go by ship, but I'm going to fly because most airplanes seem to stay in the air. I might be much more timid and think, no, I don't like the idea of flying. This fills me with dread every time I go inside the confines of an aeroplane and think upon trying to rely upon man's ability to keep this in the air for 10 or 12 hours at a time over the ocean. I'm not doing that, thank you very much. Now, which form of trust is going to be most beneficial? They both live according to the trust they have. One flies and migrates, the other just refuses to. We'll say, for argument's sake, or he refuses to do flights just for holidays. He might do it of necessity, but he's still not happy about it. Well, I think we can say that those that trust that flying is okay, do fly, and their life is, they're more varied and more open to choice than those that don't. There are exceptions, those that flew and are now dead because the aeroplane came down in a crash, but they are relatively few and far between, and they're not here to witness and argue their case that perhaps they never want to fly again. They can't anyway because they're dead, but presumably there are people that have flown, been in an aircraft accident, just survived, and no way are going to fly again. In other words, their trust has changed. Now, it's not that they're working out probability distributions or anything like that. We can hypothesize that it's the same as, but that begs a question as to whether it is. But we can say, well, if it were a probability distribution, then it would be rational to do the following, ... And that no doubt is true, and the question is still remaining, well, how would you know what the probability distribution was? It depends on the amount of information you have compared to what you might have and your experience, which changes through time. and therefore is different also for different people. And of course, it also begs the question that, well, even if I were able to, I don't have the fineness of logic to make such a formulate it in the form of a model and work out what would be rational and what I'm doing. It's a case of survival of those that get it right and the death of those that don't. I think I should take a break here, so thank you, Heavenly Dad.